going to go to school, and am I going to be safe? And until we can answer both of those in a broad and positive way, they're going to remain economic development challenges for us.
Things are just beginning to come back 10 years, and we just seeing something.
Looking back at Katrina 10 years after the flood, it was August 29th, which is 2 days from now. And there's a new book out from Gary Rivlin, who was a former New York Times reporter. The book is called Katrina After the Flood. Gary, welcome to the Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis.
Thank you.
What did you want to tell in this story?
You know, everyone was paying attention to those first days when the city was flooded, the botched recovery. I want to tell the story once the waters receded, once the city was dry, and what do you do? 80% of your city was drowned out, 110,000 homes, 20,000 businesses, virtually every school, the public utilities are destroyed. How do you rebuild a city? You know, would it everything depended on everything else. You want to come back, but will your next door neighbor? Will there be a school for your kids? Will the insurance companies provide you enough money? What role, if any, will government play? And it just seemed just this fascinating laboratory to look at the worst urban disaster in modern U.S. history.
We look at towns being destroyed by tornadoes or by an explosion or some terrible thing, but this, as you say, was unimaginable because it was flooded, and everything was destroyed. Nothing was really saved.
Right. So it's interesting. The Mississippi Gulf Coast got hit by a hurricane. So your home was knocked down or it wasn't. New Orleans actually survived Hurricane Katrina. It was the collapse of the flood protection system, and then everything became complicated. Your home was standing, but it was, ruined with 8 feet of water for several weeks, moldy water and hot weather, and so everything just was so complicated. Though, of course, anyone living along the Mississippi can relate. And can you rebuild? Should you rebuild? Maybe you're in harm's way. Will anyone help you rebuild? It was just this fascinating time that for several years people were struggling with that question.
So, Gary, how far have we come since Katrina?
The city, if you're a tourist, come on down. It's in great shape. The center of town is better than ever. Some neighborhoods are thriving. It's just been an unequal recovery. In the eastern half of the city, which is to say the African-American half of the city, there's still a lot of suffering. There are, black working-class, middle-class neighborhoods that 10 years after Katrina are half back, maybe two-thirds back, if they're lucky. And so it's the same story we see in cities around the country, this inequity between white and black.
I thought that Brad Pitt was building homes and there was all this infrastructure that was going to rebuild all that area. Did that never happen?
No, Brad Pitt did great work in the lower Ninth Ward, but Brad Pitt built 100 homes. There were 110,000 homes were drowned out, so he raised $50 million, built 100 homes, and that was a small piece of it.
How many people never came back?
Well, there's 100,000 less blacks living in New Orleans today than at the time of Katrina. New Orleans was a city of 455,000. It's impossible to say because a lot of people came post-Katrina, the YURPs they call them, the Young Urban Recovery Professionals. But roughly, the city is still missing 20% of its people.
And Gary, your book not only looks at the big picture, but you also focus on the personal stories as well.
We could talk about the failures of government and why it takes so long for FEMA or City Hall to help. But there are all these miraculous stories in every neighborhood you look. There are those people who just came back, meeting in moldy, stinking rooms, and just like, we can't wait, we're just going to do it. And there's just all these everyday heroics. It's my favorite part of writing the book, is just talking about people that just took matters into their own hand and, in fact, helped revive their community despite government, not with government.
Katrina After the Flood is Gary Rivlin's book. New Orleans is an interesting place. Characters abound. Does it still have that character?
Yeah, there's something
factor?
about the DNA of New Orleans. Like, it would take a lot to change the character. Though in the book, I don't really look at the Mardi Gras Indians or the French Quarter folks. It's just more ordinary folks. I have a banker, a tennis instructor, a cable guy, and all. So I really wanted to keep the focus less on the musicians and the chefs and more on just regular folks.
The fraud was widespread. Ray Nagin got into all that trouble. Then there was a congressman who took a boat to go back to his house to take cash out of his refrigerator.
His freezer.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of corruption shortly after Katrina as well.
Right, so the mayor at the time, Ray Nagin, is now sitting in a federal prison, serving 10 years for crimes committed in office after Katrina. I mean, the real crime here is that he was spending all his time helping a business he and his son set up and enriching himself when, in fact, he should have been working 15 hours a day to help rebuild the city. You're talking about Bill Jefferson. Those, I believe, was money taken prior to Katrina. But, there's also that disaster capitalism, the big multinationals getting money and they give it to a subcontractor, to a subcontractor, and the people actually doing the work are making a tiny bit compared to the big companies. So, everywhere you look, there are people getting wealthy.
The New Orleans housing stock, from what I understand, there's not enough housing stock for the people who want to live there. Why hasn't market forces taken over and said, this is a great place to sort of rebuild some of these houses or to build new housing stock because it's such in demand?
Well, it's a fairly poor city. It's a tourist-based economy. A lot of the kitchen help, the housekeepers in the big hotels, they're making 15, 18, 20 grand a year. So what's happened with the market is because there's so little housing, rents have gone up, home prices have gone up. Rents have gone up like 60, 70% since Katrina. In some neighborhoods, housing prices have doubled. So there's just a lot of people who are priced out. So yes, there's a demand for housing, but affordable housing is the issue.
Gary, did they fix the levees?
They did. The good news here is that New Orleans is much safer today than it was the day before Katrina. $14.5 billion in federal tax money was spent. The worry is the loss of the coastal wetlands. The best protection against storm surge that happens after a hurricane are the wetlands, and they're losing the wetlands at like 20 to 25 miles a year, 25 square miles a year. And so that's what has to happen. You could build the best levee system in the world, but if you don't start to save the wetlands, it's like the Gulf of Mexico will be right on the border of New Orleans, and nothing can protect it.
Gary Rivlin, the book is called Katrina After the Flood. Blink your eyes, 10 years later, in 2 days, it'll be 10 years after. Did you talk to President Bush at all in the book?
No, but one of the main characters is a good friend of his, a wealthy developer down here who had Karl Rove's cell phone and would check in with President Bush. So I very much had that perspective in the book through this man Joe Canizero.
All right, Katrina After the Flood. Gary, thanks for checking in.
Thank you.
728 Big 550 KTRS.